This is Jeff Perlman, founder and CEO of Xojo, and today I'm going to show you how to use something called DBKit, which makes it very, very easy for you to connect your databases to the applications you create in Xojo. Now, in the previous 4 videos in this series, you learned how to connect to a database, query a database, update a database, and manage the user interface when updating a database. If you haven't watched those videos yet, you'll want to watch them first. The benefit of DBKit is that it takes care of almost all of those things for you, connecting, updating, managing the whole user interface without you having to write much code at all. So let's take a look. DBKit comes with an example project for the desktop and a nearly identical one for the web. When it comes to editing rows, DBKit assumes that the layout you're creating will have a list of records the user can click on to edit, where the controls for editing are on the same layout. Or you'll have a list for editing where the list is on a separate layout, and the user can double-click on a row and then edit the row in its own window. This is true when you use it to build a web application as well. You have a list of rows the user can click on to edit, or you can have the list of rows in a separate layout, and when the user double-clicks, you take them to the new layout where they can do their editing. And of course, with the web, that's all in the same window. It's in the same browser window. DBKit requires Xojo 2023 R2 or later. It comes with example projects for the desktop and for the web, and there'll be a mobile example coming in a future release. And if you check the Getting Started section of the documentation, you'll find that there are tutorials for using DBKit with desktop projects and with web projects. To show you how easy it is to use DBKit, I'm going to recreate the single window example from the DBKit desktop example. Now, if you did this for the web, it would be virtually identical. And in our documentation, we include tutorials for both using DBKit on the desktop and the web. So you'll have step-by-step instructions on how to do this yourself. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is make a new desktop project. And I'm going to save my project. And I've got a little folder called DBKit Demo. I'm going to put it in there because that's where I have the database that I'm going to use and some icons as well. So I'm going to call this DBKit-demo. Now DBKit comes with some icons you can use, so I'm going to copy those in. So I'm going to go to the Finder, and there's my folder where I saved my project. So I'm going to go ahead and drag the icons folder into my project. There we go. Great. Next, we need the DBKit module itself, and you can just get that out of the DBKit project. So I've got that here. So just open either one, the desktop or the web, click on DBKit and copy, and then you can close that, then go to your project and paste. Okay, so now you've got the DBKit module in there. You can just go ahead and close that up. So in my project here, I'm going to be working with an existing database. So what I want to do is copy that database into the application anytime I run or build, because the database is going to be part of the application. So to do that, I'm going to go to Insert and choose Build Step, Copy Files, and I'll call this Copy DB, and I'm going to have it put it in the Resources folder of the application. Now, the next thing I need to do is put the actual database file in this list here. So I'm going to go back to the Finder. There's my database file I'm using. I'll drop that in there. Great. Now, the last step here for copying it is to tell it when to copy. So I'm going to go down to Build Settings. I'm doing this on a Mac, so I'm going to expose the Mac build setting, and I'm going to drag my copy build step down to right after build. So it'll build the app, then it'll copy the database into the resources folder, and we'll be good to go. Now, in the end, what you'll want to do is copy the database from the resources folder into a directory or folder on the user's machine and have them edit that one. But during development, it's handy to just use the copy we've put into the resources folder. Now it's time to connect to the database. This window is going to show the interface for our application, and I don't want this window to appear unless we actually are able to connect to the database. So I'm going to go over to the app class, and I'm going to change the default window to none. Now I'm going to add a property to the app class. I'm going to call this DB. And this is going to be a DBKit connector. That's part of DBKit. And I'm going to make this public. Okay, now I'm going to go to the application's opening event. Let's add that. and we're going to put in the code to actually connect to the database. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this in so you don't have to watch me type. It's going to create a DBKit connector object and store it in the property that we just created. It's then going to call the connected method of DBKit connector, and it's passing it that database. It's in a special folder, resources. That's the application's resources folder, and it's getting that database. And if that succeeds, it's going to open window 1. Otherwise, we're going to get a message that it couldn't reach the database. All right, so next I need to add a DBKit connector to the window. So I'm going to go into the DBKit, and I'm going to go to classes, and there's DBKit connector. And I'm just going to drag that out onto the window. There it is. Because DBKit connector not only is used to connect to your database, but it's also used to exchange data between your database and your user interface. So now I want this DBKit connector 1 to use the connection that we created earlier. So I'm going to double click, add its opening event, and put in a line of code. And this is going to set its connection property equal to the same one that we set up in the application class. So when we connect to the database, it's going to populate the DB property, copy that connection into DB connector. Now it's time to create some user interface. I'm going to start with a search field. Put that up here at the top. Drag it across. There we go. And a list box. So we can do a search and then populate the list box with our search results. I'll make that a little narrower. There we go. Now I'm going to go to the inspector and make a few changes. First of all, let's go back to the search field. I'm going to call this search customers. And for the list box, I'm going to call this search results. And I'm going to make it 2 columns. And I'm going to set it so that it requires a selection. So there's always something selected. And let's go to the initial value. I want this to show the customer's first name. I hit tab there, and then their last name. Those would be my column headers. Okay, great. Now DBKit has a whole bunch of built-in controls. In fact, if you go over to DBKit and you look under modules, and in this case desktop, and go to classes, you can see there's a bunch of controls built in here, but rather than having to dig them out of there, since I've already got my list box here, I want to make this a DBKit search results list box. And I can do that by going to the super property, clicking on the pencil, and you'll see it'll come right up because it's the only subclass of list box in my project. So just pick that. And now it knows that that's a DBKit search results list box, so it'll know how to work with the search field. So the next thing we're going to do is we need to tell it to bind the database columns, first name and last name, to that list box. So I'm going to go back to DBKit connector and go to its open event. And I'm going to put in some more code here. So this is going to bind the first name and last name columns from the customer's database to the search results list box. Now I'm going to add a method that will do the actual searching when the user uses the search field. So I'm going to add a method, and I'm going to call it search for customers. Now I'll paste in the code. So what is this doing? So it's removing any rows that are in the search results, just in case you did a search before. It's then creating a row set, and if the search customers field, the search field is blank, then it's just going to select all the customers. And if not, then it's going to do a search where it's going to look at the first name or last name and look for any customer whose name begins with either of those. I'm using the wildcard character here, the %sign, and it's using like. So basically it's going to say if the first name or last name starts with whatever the user typed in, it's going to find those. And then the DBKit search results list box has its own method called add rows from row set. So you just pass it a row set and bang, the rows show up. If something goes wrong, we'll get an exception. So we want to call this from search customers. So I'm going to double click on the search customers search field and go to the text changed event, and I'll just type in search for customers. There we go. Last but not least, before we can search, we need to bind this search results list box to DB connector itself. So I'm going to go to that open event again, and I'm going to put in some more code. So this is just binding all of the controls on the layout to DB connector. Doesn't matter what controls you put on there, as long as they're DBKit controls, and you'll see more of them in a minute, this will take care of binding all of them in this one line of code. Great, now let's run and give it a shot. Okay, so I'm going to type in a few. Look at that, I've already got rows, and I can type in whatever I want, and it's doing a match on either first name or last name. And I didn't have to write loops. I didn't have to write things to deal with the list box. DBKit just handled all of that on its own. Now it's time to add some other controls that'll display the data from the record that the user clicks on in the list box. So I'm going to grab a text field. I'm going to position that. And I'm going to call it first name. And by default, DBKit's going to try and match the name of the control to the database column. So ideally, you just go ahead and call it first name because that's the name of the column. And down in the hint, let's add first names. The user knows that's what it is. And then I need to make this a DBKit text field. That way it's automatically connected to DBKit. So I'm going to go back to the super, click on the pencil, and there it is. There's the DBKit text field. So it's called DB text field. So you just select that. And now the easiest thing to do for the rest of the fields is to duplicate them. So let me do that real quick. So what I'm doing here is I'm just duplicating the existing control. It's already a DBKit text field. And then I'm just changing the control name to match the name of the column I want for that control in the database and setting its hint property so the user knows what to type. It's really that simple. As an alternative to matching the control name to the column, in the inspector there's a DBKit section and it has a column property you can use. Earlier I mentioned that there's other DBKit controls as well. I'm going to go over to the library, grab a pop-up menu. We're going to put the state there. So I'm going to position that. Over the inspector, I'm going to call it state or region. That matches my database. And I'm going to make it a DB pop-up menu. And now you'll notice the DBKit section has a bunch of new columns because now it's a DBKit control. And one of the ones I want to point out here is auto-populate. So this is actually kind of neat. You can turn this on, and what it's going to do is it's going to go get all the distinct or unique values out of this column in the database and populate the pop-up menu for us. All right, so I've got 3 more columns I want to add. I've got a last contact, that's a date, so I'm going to put that on there. And a checkbox that's taxable, let's put that on there. And last but not least, I've got a picture, so I'm going to drag out an image viewer. Now that I've got these here, let me go to the inspector and let's set these up. So this is going to be last contact, and I'm going to make it a DB date time picker from DBKit. And I'm going to make this taxable, since that's what it keeps track of. And let's change the caption to taxable. And then I'm going to make this a DBKit checkbox. Okay, and finally the image viewer, I'm going to call this photo, and I'm going to make it a DB image viewer. Now it's time to see DBKit in action. We've created these controls, we set them up to be DBKit controls. We didn't have to write any code to populate them. DBKit's going to take care of all that for us. So let's hit run and see what happens. All right, so I'm going to quickly do a search. I type in a few characters, and you can see it automatically populated all the fields. Anytime I click in a row, they're automatically populated. Even the pop-up menu is set for us, etc. Photos are loaded. So DBKit's handling all of that for you without you having to write any code at all. Now that we can search for records, the next step is to be able to edit records, to be able to delete records and make new ones. Fortunately, DBKit can handle all of that for you. I'm going to make some room for some buttons. And I'm going to bring out a button, and this will be my edit button. So I'm going to call it edit button, and I'm going to make it a DBKit edit button. So I can handle all of that functionality. And I'll give it the caption edit. Okay, so now I've got an edit button. I'm going to lock this, and let me move this to exactly where I want it. That looks good. And I'm going to drag this down here a bit. Okay, next I'm going to add an undo button. I'm going to position that next to this one. And I'm going to go to the inspector. We'll call this undo button. And you guessed it, I'm going to make it a DB undo button. Change its caption to undo. Great. All right, so next let's add a delete button. There we go. Call this delete button. make its caption delete, and choose DB delete button. Last but not least, I need a button to create new records, but I don't quite have enough room here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some room. I'm going to make these fields here resizable. I'm going to lock them to the right side. That way I can make this a little bit wider. There we go. Stretch this out a bit here too. And now we've got some room for a new button. All right, so I'm going to go to the library, grab another button, position that where I want it. Okay, and we'll call that new button. And as you can probably guess, I'm going to choose DB new button. And let's change the caption to new. Great. Okay, so let's try out these buttons. I'm going to hit run. All right, so we've got our buttons at the bottom. It automatically enables and disables them. You'll notice that undo is disabled because we haven't made any changes. So I'm going to go ahead and click edit to go into edit mode. Now the fields are changeable. You'll notice the pop-up menu is populated. That was auto-populated by the database. All we had to do is check a checkbox to make that happen. So that's great. I can make a change. Let me change the last name to my last name. And when I hit done, you'll notice the list box updated automatically. I didn't have to do anything to make that happen. DBKit handled that for us. Also, when you're editing, if you decide to make a change and then the user decides to leave, go to another record without saving, DBKit automatically warns them that they have unsaved changes and gives them the opportunity to either continue and lose those changes or hit cancel and go back. So you can do that. You can delete. When you delete, you get a confirmation dialog box. Again, DBKit handles this for you. And if you're needing to localize your app, these dialogs are all localizable as well. So DBKit handles all of that functionality for you without you having to write much code at all. In fact, the code you do write, you pretty much just copy and paste right out of DBKit. And all you're doing is setting up the columns and the table names that you want to use. So that's DBKit. If you want to try building this project yourself, just go to the documentation, go to Getting Started, click on Tutorials, and you'll find the DBKit tutorials for desktop and web. And at the end of each of those, you'll find instructions on how to build the 2-layout version of the interface that I showed earlier. And also, if you go to the topics section of the documentation, you'll find an item called DBKit, which will give you all the information you need on how to use DBKit, with all the methods, events, notes on how to use it, supported controls, everything you need to use DBKit successfully. And if you just want to dive right in and start playing with the desktop or web versions of DBKit, just go to the project chooser, go to examples, go to databases, and choose the one you want to play with. And that's DBKit. Thanks for watching.